Good morning. So happy to have everybody out this morning. My name is Patrick Seals, and I work for the City of Richmond. And we, in collaboration with the Richmond Community Foundation, are happy to host you this morning for a part of our ECIA capacity building workshop, which is on staff retention and engagement. Just want to let you know that this is the third in a series of 4 capacity building trainings. The next one is going to be hosted here again on November the 15th, which is going to be a Thursday. And it's called From Facebook and YouTube to You. And what it's about is how do you leverage the power of social media and digital marketing to empower your organization in some really meaningful ways. So we just want to say thank you again for coming out. We're happy to have you here. And I would encourage you all to engage and participate and challenge yourselves and even challenge our speaker about how it is that you can leverage what it is that she's having to offer. And before we have our speaker, I'm going to introduce Ms. Stacy Street, who's in partnership with us, and then she'll introduce our facilitator this morning. Stacy Street, Richmond Community Foundation.
Hello. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much again for all being here. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker. And just as a couple words, Richmond Community Foundation, we actually just went through a major organizational refocusing. But our new mission is that we harness the power of connection to build healthy, sustainable communities. And this is a perfect example of how we're doing that by bringing wonderful resources like training, as well as contributions and philanthropy to support organizations like yours so you can keep doing all the amazing work that you do on the ground to build healthy communities. So we really appreciate that. So just remember, we're going to be here trying to partner even more to help support you. So that's what RCF's all about. So we're delighted to have Dr. Lydia Hughes Evans back here. For those of you that were here before, she did a wonderful workshop that is on the website about organizational sustainability. So if you didn't see that, go check that one out as well. But today she's going to be talking to you about staff recruitment, retention, and engagement, which is absolutely critical for your organizations, as you all know since you're here. Lydia is the founder and CEO of Pure Momentum Consulting, which she founded 10 years ago. And she has an extensive background and experience in the field. She has been working both with organizations and individuals in many different capacities, including as an organizational consultant, which is her primary focus right now, a group home administrator, a teacher, a vocational counselor, trainings facilitator, and tutor. So she's done a lot of different things. She's also based right here locally, which we love that she is right here in our community. So think about her if you're looking for somebody to help support your organization on an individual basis as well. But we're just delighted to have her back. And without further ado, she has a lot of wonderful content to share with you today. Here you go, Lydia.
Thank you. Thank you. Stacy's always great. I want to make sure I don't double mic myself here, so I'm going to put this one down. Is that okay? All right. Hey, everyone. We'll try it again. Good morning. It's really good to see you guys. Some of you I've seen before, and so I'm happy to be able to see you and interact with you again. Just so you'll know, I definitely am a teacher by heart, and so I have that projecting voice, and I get very excited about what I talk about. So if the mic needs to be adjusted, please just give Patrick or someone a heads up on that, because I do get into what I'm doing. So I welcome you here today. I really trust and believe that together will be very well spent. And I want you to really be in the space of thinking about how does this information directly relate to your agency. And the thing I want to be able to get into as well is that before I start, the content here is relevant not just for paid staff, but it's also relevant for volunteers. And even more so for volunteers because they're not getting paid, right? But you still need their help and their support and their buy-in, okay? So kind of keep that in mind. So it's we say staff, but we mean staff and volunteers. So that's my logo. I've loved being in business. Stacy shared a little bit about my background. And I think for me, what matters the most is that when you're working in a nonprofit organization, staff and volunteers are dealing with things that aren't necessarily the same in a corporate setting. So you're dealing with maybe getting paid less for comparable work. You're dealing with infrastructure that may or may not be the strongest at this particular point, because most people, when they start a nonprofit, they're passionate about the vision and the mission. Infrastructure is not quite their thing, right? But as a staff or a volunteer, you're impacted by that. You can feel that, and it impacts you in your daily life every day. On top of that, if you're providing services to clients that are challenging or difficult populations like the homeless or sexually exploited minors or things like that, you're also dealing with trauma and vicarious trauma that impacts your work. So there's a lot that goes on in a nonprofit setting that's a little bit different than a corporate setting. And so I actually wrote that book just for that reason, and I'm calling it Organizational Poverty. And the reason why it's organizational poverty is because nonprofits, if we're not careful, we can get into this, we don't have enough staff, we don't have enough money, we don't have enough this, we don't have enough that, and that sense of lack can really impact how we function, how our staff is able to sustain themselves, and how we inevitably provide services. So that book is available on Amazon. Definitely check it out if you get a chance. So jumping right into why we're here today. So a little bit of statistics, 76% of employees want opportunities for career growth. And this is not just, these stats are not just indicative to nonprofits. So this is employees in general. 25% of employees would be more satisfied if they had the opportunity to do what you hired them on to do, which is why they took the position in the first place. Sometimes we get into things and it feels like we don't get the opportunity to do what we actually enjoy and are passionate about. And one of the ones that the statistics I think is one of the most important is that 40% of employees who don't get trained well leave within the first year. So nonprofits are kind of known a little bit. We have great reputations for a lot of things, but one of the things that's kind of not so great is our level of staff turnover. And so one of the key reasons why is actually because of the kind of lack of training piece. So I wanted to make sure I brought that piece up. So this is my kind of model of how I see staff engagement and retention. And it actually starts with the idea of recruitment. So we're going to walk through all 5 of these levels throughout this presentation today. How we recruit and what we go and when we look for in our process for that is really important, because that's the front end of all of the work that gets done and the organization, how it's run. Then how we onboard and acculturate people into our culture, into our organization, bringing in our values and our structure and our strategy is really, really important. It's another opportunity for potentially losing people if people don't feel acculturated and a part of what you're doing. Then there's the training piece that I just talked about. So we're going to go into that a little bit more. This is from my experience. The next section is another area of opportunity for improvement for most nonprofits. You'd be surprised how many organizations I work with that don't evaluate anybody ever. So we're going to talk about that. And then we're going to get into what happens if we've successfully recruited, we've onboarded, we have acculturated, we've trained them, we've evaluated them, but it's still not working out. Now what do we do? So this is what that particular model looks like, and so we're going to kind of walk through it step by step today. Does that sound cool to you guys? Yeah. All right, all right. Okay, so step 1 on the staff recruitment process. So I'll let you know I'm not a HR person, okay? So it's very important that any information that you hear here today, that if you have some specific questions, particularly about legal compliance and legal HR, labor law, federal labor law, state labor law, and things like that, that you actually contact the HR consultant. So I actually have one on my team, but I'm not really focusing in on those very compensation, benefits, salary, all that kind of stuff. We're not going to do that today, okay? But looking at the staff recruitment process, number 1 is identifying your staffing plan and creating a staffing plan. Your staffing plan should be in alignment with your organizational chart, which I hope everyone has. I don't care how small, and I don't care if you have 1 paid staff and everybody else is volunteers, you need an org chart. So that's very, very important because it really helps to define the structure, the relationship between the roles and jobs in your organization. So that's very important. From that, you develop a staffing plan. Ideally, what you're looking for is opportunities to always make sure that the roles in your organization stay filled, that there's always people who are able to walk into, are prepped into, to be able to step into an opportunity if something arises. So there should be a kind of a pipeline that you have, particularly of like your key roles. So what happens a lot of times in nonprofits is that somebody leaves unexpectedly, and then we're screwed. So we're scrambling and we're running around trying to find somebody. When if we've kind of looked at and thought about it from the staffing plan perspective, you know, we cross-trained this person with this person. So if that person leaves, then this person at least knows a good sufficient amount to be able to help support that role until that role is filled. So just like you have in a board, you have a chair and a vice chair. That's kind of that premise, right? Is that the vice chair is not operating as the chair, but knows a little bit enough of that information to be able to help to step in and support until that role is filled. So for all of your major roles and your org chart, you need to have some level of a staffing plan and a pipeline for where we're looking for getting those candidates both internally and externally. Okay. Then number 2 is developing a job analysis. So one of the fun things that happens to me is I get clients and they'll call me in for whatever's happening in their organization. Sometimes if it's staff related, they'll say that they're having a kind of a difficult time with this particular employee or whatever the case is. One of my favorite things is to watch that person in action for a few hours and then look at their job description. And most of the time, it doesn't match. What they do in real time is not actually what's on their job description. And so it's very, very important that we take the time to actually make sure that there is an alignment between real-time work and what the job description actually says. One way of being able to do that is to conduct something that's called a time study. So if you're not sure, actually, and if you're executive leadership in an organization, I encourage you to do this for all of your major, particularly your roles and mid-level roles underneath you. Because what happens is that we're all operating kind of doing our thing, right? And it's really, really difficult sometimes to know what other people are doing or what that job really is. So if you do a time study, you ask them to be able to track their hours for over maybe 2 weeks. Everything that they do in their task, right? Doesn't need to be super complex. You'll get some of the OCD people who are like, I'll put it into an Excel spreadsheet, you know, with formulas. It could be a written log. It doesn't really matter. But it gives you an opportunity to be able to see how much of that job, what does that actually entail? Is 70% of it actually admin stuff when it's supposed to be an external role where you're going out and doing sales, right? What does that look like in real time? Then you can kind of quantify what that looks like and then apply that into your job descriptions once you write them. But having people do a real-time study makes a big, big difference. Another thing that used to happen to me when I was sometimes overseeing staff, so I oversaw a drug and alcohol treatment facility down in San Jose, and I had about 40 people that give or took reported pretty much directly to me. And that was mid-level supervisors, therapists, and then direct care staff. And so I would have staff who would come to me and say, you know what, I'm really overwhelmed. I don't really even know where to start in what's happening with me. And so the first thing I would say is go do a time study. Because then I could really see what's happening. If you're spending 75% of your job dealing with crises of your time, that tells me a lot, right? So that would usually be my starting point. And then from there, we could start to develop some solutions to be able to make this a better fit for you. Then you're doing your job description and then your job specification development, which is essentially finding ways of being able to making sure that you know that people within your organization know that these positions are open, what you're looking for, invite them to be able to invite others who may be a good fit, and spreading the word on that. Making sure that you're knowing like I said, the federal and labor law, state, EEOC, all of those great things that kind of occupy our space in relationship to hiring. And I will tell you, which is why we have that in our slide, that evaluation piece is key. So when we get to that staff evaluation piece, I really hope that you're paying attention. That is one of the biggest areas where organizations fall short in relationship to having to potentially terminate someone. So that's important. Then you're implementing a recruitment plan, which is in joint with everybody in your organization. So it's important that it's not just, even if you have an HR person or HR department, it's not just HR's responsibility to find people, right? A lot of the time, was that an amen? A lot of the times, actually, the most staff that are the better fit comes from people within the organization, right? But what that says is, and you'll figure that out by the time we get to the end of this presentation, your staff better like your organization. They better feel supported, valued, a part of, and bought in, because otherwise, when you have roles that need to be filled, they're going to tell their friend, don't apply for that. You don't want to come here, right? So that's very important. But applying and filling those positions is a group responsibility, not just HR. And then you're accepting your application materials and you're conducting your interviews. Some of the things that I found helpful with interviewing staff, particularly relationship to nonprofits, learning style assessments. How do you learn? Are you an auditory learner? Are you a visual learner? Are you a kinesthetic learner? This is important information because as a supervisor, I'm an auditory learner. So if I'm supervising you and you're a visual learner and I'm trying to convey information to you about how to do your job and I am just saying a whole bunch of words and I can't visually show you anything, a graph, a chart to depict, you're going to be like, right? And now I'm wondering why we're having this communication gap. Why are you not following through with what I asked you to do? Where's the challenges? So knowing how people learn is extremely, extremely important. They have easy links for these things that you can do online that are very, very quick. But I always embedded that into my interviewing process. So there will be a few things that I ask people to complete in addition to the basic interview questions. And the learning style assessment was one of them. Another thing is a personality assessment. Myers-Briggs is a great one. It's used in corporate settings as well. You can also do it free online. I am an INTJ, which means I'm an introvert. I am an intuitive. I'm a thinker as opposed to a feeler, and I judge on perceptions and facts. INTJs are about 3% of the general population, and most of them are males. So there's even fewer women INTJs. So I know that when I'm walking around in the world, I tend to look through the world through that particular kind of lens. But if I can also tell what your personality style is, I can make that adaptation and adjustment as we work together and do what we're called to do. So those two, for me, the learning style assessments and the personality assessments are really, really important. So let me see, backing up a second. Okay, so there's 4 rules. And I don't know if I shared this one the last time, but I'm going to share it again. All right, here we go. The hare, the owl, the turtle, and the squirrel. So the hare is the person who has all the ideas, right? They're always thinking of ideas. It's like rapid fire. They usually like sleep with a notebook by their bed because they wake up with ideas of things that they want to be able to do. Implement, new businesses to start, whatever. And then there's the owl, who's the strategist. And the owl is like, okay, hare, that's great you got all those ideas. But how do we get from point A to point B on that? What are the steps it's going to take to make that happen? Then there's the turtle. Now, the turtle is the guy that we kind of necessarily don't like as much because he's like, that's a good idea, but let me tell you all the reasons why it's not going to work. He kind of likes to poke holes in things. But the turtle is your risk assessor. If you go on a journey and you don't have a turtle, you may just fall off a cliff. It may be a good idea, but there may be some things that you really need to look at that risk assessor can help you look at. And then there's the squirrel, who's like, I don't come up with new ideas. I'm not a strategist. I'm not going to poke darts at it. Just tell me what to do next. Just give me the list, right? So it's important that on all of your staff groupings and teams, particularly your management team, that you know if you're a hare, an owl, a turtle, and a squirrel, and you have all of those 4 groups represented. Because as you move forward with leading your organization, with developing strategy, with moving forward on programming, All of those pieces are important. That you have someone who's going to come up with innovative and creative ideas, that you have a strategist that's going to help you to be able to fulfill it, that you have somebody that's going to look at it with a critical eye and be honest with you, and that you have people who are going to help to implement. Okay? Okay, so staff onboarding process. So we were talking about acculturating people into your organization, into your values and your strategy. And every organization, I talked about this a little bit before, actually we went through this in depth. We talked and so you can go look at that video. We talked about strategic planning. So every organization should have a level of strategic plan where you know where you're headed, where you're looking to be in the next 2 to 3 years, 3 to 5 years, what those goals are, and how you're going to be able to measure and achieve those goals. Same thing, there's the organizational strategic plan, and then there should be some level of planning for individual programming that you have as well. So part of that is the goals, the values of your organization. You're bringing people in, and you're getting them acclimated. So this little chart I really liked because it really kind of talks about how to bring people in. So you're setting up your orientation, you're making sure that they have all the stuff that they need from HR, and you set up weekly meetings for them with their manager. I will say, for the first 90 days when I would bring in somebody new, they met a weekly meeting with their direct manager once a week for the whole 90 days, the whole 3 months. Because you'd be surprised what stuff comes up when you're acclimating to a new culture. Sometimes it's personalities, sometimes it's workflow challenges, sometimes it's stress, sometimes it's personal life. And if you're not staying in contact with these people in that first 90 days, so they don't feel connected to the organization, those are the ones who tend to also walk away pretty quickly too. But they were never really fully integrated from the gate to begin with, right? So having that opportunity to check in with your direct supervisor just for like 30 minutes, 45 minutes, at least once a week, knowing that you have that time with that person to say, hey, this is working or this really isn't working. I don't really know what I'm doing. That's really, really important. So then a team level orientation for a group of new employees. If you're integrating somebody that's new into a program, it's great to be able to, if you have like a monthly meeting or things like that, give that opportunity away, that person a way to be able to serve and be a part of that meeting. Even when they're kind of like new, it's really important to keep them engaged with the team level as well. And then your mid-year review. So we're going to talk about that, but that's on the checklist. Making sure that we integrate them into the culture. What do you guys stand for? What's your organization stand for? What's your value system? What do you value in the clients that you serve, but what do you also value internally? Showing up on time, giving it our best shot. No idea is a bad idea. So feel free to throw whatever you want out there, and we can see if we can work with it. Don't be afraid, right? Those are the things that organizations value, but it's important that we articulate that to people when they come in. It's not just that you just get that by osmosis. You actually need to kind of be told what the organizational values are here. What do we value as a culture and as a team? And then offering opportunities for personal and professional growth. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get into the evaluation piece. Making sure that all the appropriate trainings are set up, job specific, anything that's in relationship to compliance and regulations that they need to know, all of those things. Opportunities for team building. We'll talk about that a little bit more. And then making sure that you recognize people. We'll definitely get into that. Wow, it's a big deal. Especially for volunteers, you're not paying them. They don't feel recognized, they don't buy in, but staff is the same way. Even if you are paying them, they don't feel recognized, you're not gonna get a whole lot out of them. So I like this chart because what it allows you to do is actually when you onboard somebody, it allows you to plan out through the time that they're there, through their first year, how you're integrating them thoughtfully into your organization, okay? So I hope that you can use something like this that helps to kind of plan out that process for you. Okay, so training, big deal for training. Okay, so we talked about the fact that 40% of employees tend to leave within their first year because they do not feel appropriately trained. And the training starts day one. So I've been in organizations where I started and I got probably about 4 hours worth of training within the first week. And it's like, here's your job and here's your desk, go for it. Like, okay. I, as an INTJ, I'm a systems thinker. So I can build out a job. You could tell me my job description could be this big, and I can build a system for that. Everybody's not like that. Most people aren't like that. So it really is important that you carefully design those job descriptions and align a training plan that matches what's needed for that. And that training plan should also be integrated not just into each individual job and role, but into the organizational strategy of where you're headed and where you're going. So there's an alignment between the role and the training, but also alignment between your organizational goals and your training plan. Okay? So first thing is to make it a line item on your budget. So when you do your fiscal budget, July, whatever your fiscal year is, actually plan out some dollars for training. You'd be surprised how many organizations I look at their budget and there's no line item for training. Which means that, because when I look at your budget, it tells me what your priorities are. If you haven't at least set aside $500 at minimum for training, that shows that you're not really all that invested in the growth and development of your employees or your organization. Because training is the key. So making sure that it's a line item on your budget is really important. And then based on your organizational goals and the individual role needs, figure out who needs to be trained. And then we'll talk about the 4 elements of adult learning. Okay, first one, intrinsic motivation. This actually comes up on another slide too, but I'll go through it right here as well. Intrinsic motivation is that inner desire to be awesome. We all have it, but it's important that particularly in nonprofit settings, because we're not paying you a whole lot and you're going to be under a significant amount of stress, more or less, give or take, it's important that we really develop the intrinsic motivation of staff. So intrinsic motivation is comprised of 3 things. That's relatedness, competence, and autonomy. Relatedness, competence, and autonomy. Relatedness has to do with their relationships with each other, with their manager, with their team, with the organization as a whole. And that's where that slide before, that really kind of pre-thought of onboarding, acculturation process is so important. Because if people don't feel related in some way or connected to the organization, you're not going to get the most out of them. They're going to be there just to collect their paycheck, do what they got to do, and leave. Because they're not going to be bought in. Okay. Relatedness, competence, that's where the training piece comes in. People want to do what they want to do well. No one wants to be like a mediocre person or a mediocre employee. Most people have the desire to do their very best, but they need your support as an organization to be able to help support them through training to be the best that they can be. So we all bring something to the table, but that needs to kind of be developed. And then autonomy is the 3rd piece, and that's the piece that I probably hear the most about as a consultant. It's kind of comedy. You don't got to micromanage anybody. Give people the space. Once you've trained them, that's the key. Don't just give people space if you haven't trained them. Once you've trained them and once you've connected them to the organization, give them the space to do their job. Trust them enough to do their job. We're going to talk about trust later on. But those key pieces are so important. Autonomy, relatedness, and competence. That's really what develops people's intrinsic motivation to be exceptional at what they do. Positive reinforcement, that's a big deal. As a teacher, we used to do this in the classroom all the time, particularly if I had a child who was struggling with behavior challenges and I found myself saying more things to them that were negative than positive. When I would catch them doing good, I acknowledged it. If there was a few minutes that he was actually sitting in his seat and engaged in the work, I said, Johnny, that was amazing. I saw you. And that made a difference. That positive recognition, letting people know that you value them, that you see them, that you recognize their impact, that goes a long way. And donors, we talk about that too. People giving you money, you better recognize them, say thank you. One of the major reasons why people stop giving is honestly because 70, 80% of donor attrition is because nobody said thank you. Nobody appreciated me. Nobody valued me. So particularly goes for staff, but it goes for everybody. But it's a way of being able to help develop that intrinsic motivation. Retention through the practice of learned skills. So once you've trained somebody, give them the opportunity to practice things a little bit. Don't just like send somebody to, I've seen this happen, send somebody to an off-site training and then be like, okay, come teach us how to do it here and then direct that. It doesn't work like that. But I've seen it happen all the time. It had to happen to me before. Like I said, that person was lucky because I'm an INTJ. I could do that, but most people can't do that. So don't demand that of people. It's important that once a person has been trained, you give them the opportunity to practice it, and you kind of give that feedback, right? Oh, you did really, really great with this. That was awesome. But maybe the next time we could think about this other piece here. How can we incorporate that in a little bit differently? Right? So it's kind of walking alongside someone and supporting them as they're implementing a new skill or implementing a new concept. And then giving them the opportunity to apply what they've learned directly to the workplace. The worst thing that we tend to do is sometimes organizations have X amount of training hours that they need to fulfill. So we just send people to training, or we make them sit online and they have to go to these trainings. And they learn all this great stuff, but there's never an opportunity to actually apply it in their organization, in their job at all, ever. One of the worst things to do. So when you pick the training, and be very careful about that, because you also got to make sure you give them the space to be able to try it out and do that thing. So that's what makes it so that we can actually retain the concepts that we learn. One is learning it, but then also is doing it. Okay. So from that, once you've at least decided that you're going to make training a priority, you've made it a budget item. Now you're going to create your agency training plan. So you're aligning the organizational goals to the learning outcomes from each training module. So once again, training is embedded into the organizational strategy, direction, and goals. So it's not just training as some separate thing. Because all of your jobs should be aligned to the organizational strategy and goals, right? Where we're going, where we're headed. Your structure, your org chart should be helping to promote those things. So training is another piece of that. Figuring out who needs to be trained and within each topic area. A lot of the times, the only time we really think about training is when an employee is not doing well. Then all of a sudden we want to retrain folks. But if we are planning from the gate, and like we have with that little chart, of when people are going to be trained, you don't end up in that kind of catch-22 at the end. So that's really, really important. And thinking about who needs to be trained, everybody kind of needs to be trained, but there's specific things that are important per topic or what their role is. And then you're going to create a master training calendar. So I know in fund development, we create a fundraising calendar for the year, right? These are all the events we're going to have. These are going to be thank you events. These events are going to be a hard ask event. You do the same thing for training, right? So you have a training calendar that really goes, and it makes sure that it hits the main points of your organization. And then, because we're all different learners and we learn different ways, it's important that we give them a variety of ways to be able to train. And that we are aligning. If I know that you're a kinesthetic learner, I'm not going to have you just go sit in a lecture for 2 hours because you're going to die, right? Because you need to be moving around. You need to be engaged, right? And so it's important that we align and we have enough of those different types of learning to meet the variety of learning styles that we have as adults. Okay, and before I move on to the next slide, the key piece that we kind of miss in nonprofits with training, the group of people who need your biggest support are your mid-level supervisors. They're not executive directors, they're not on the executive management team, but they are directly reporting, supervising others. They're dealing with the challenges of the staff that they're reporting and the trauma and vicarious trauma of the services that staff is reporting to. Then they're dealing with the challenges of the board mandates and all the executive management stuff that comes down. So your mid-level supervisors get stuck in the middle. That's the group that when stuff comes apart, that's where it happens at, usually in an organization. Those are the ones who are going to leave the quickest, but those are the ones who actually have the most amount of organizational knowledge and history at the same time. And that's kind of like your front line. Your front line is not your direct care people. That's your front line. But the next and most important front line is the mid-level supervisors. Okay. All right, evaluating. It's important that we evaluate everybody. Everybody. You see the board is up here too, right? So let's start with that. The board, that's like an informal evaluation. And the reason why I put that there is because what'll happen, just like anybody else as a part of your organization, your board members are serving as volunteers. They're giving you their network. They're giving you their resources. They're not getting paid, right? One of the things that happens is that if you're not checking in with them on a regular basis, they become disengaged. And they'll just say, I'm leaving your board. So I've seen this happen, where people just randomly left. And now the board went from 17 down to 3, but the organization is still running the same programming with no support. So checking in informally with your board, you could just take them to coffee, ask them how are they doing, do they feel connected to the organization, what's working well for them, what are some areas that they can see that can be improved. That helps to increase their retention rate of being able to stay and feel connected. It can be done like annually or twice a year, just checking in. It's an informal evaluation, okay? So your executive director, though, or your CEO or COO, or whoever that next layer is, definitely needs to be evaluated annually, and your staff needs to be evaluated as well. It's easy to do a 90-day kind of informal check-in when you first onboard a new person. And then I like to check in with them at the 6-month mark as well, because now that's kind of informal, not necessarily a formal process, but now you've been in it for a while. It was all fun and games when you were new. But now you've been here and you've seen behind the curtain and you see what happens behind Oz, and sometimes it gets a little scary. So that's a good opportunity to check in and to keep them connected. But at minimum, after they've been with you for a year, everyone needs to be evaluated annually. Annually. Okay, so it starts with the start employee will self-evaluate. That's the first thing. So we like to do ideas of like 360s, or there's a lot of different ways to evaluate, but it's really, really important that the staff person themselves has an opportunity to evaluate their own self and their own role. Okay, so the easiest way to do that is just you make 2 copies of the evaluation. You fill out one, and then the manager fills out one. And then you sit down and you kind of talk about that. And you gather any other employee performance data and complete the evaluation. And then you have your meeting, right, with Johnny. And I like to use the cookie method of having evaluation meetings, actually any kind of meeting. So the first thing you want to talk about on the outside of the cookie is the things that Johnny is doing well. We don't tend to lead with that, but that's also very, very important. So the first thing, the things that Johnny is doing well, and you want to be very specific. So not just you're a great employee, but when you headed that project last year, your leadership really brought the difference, made the difference. You helped to increase our organizational revenue by 2%. You want to be as specific as you can when you're sharing great things about Johnny. Then in the middle is where you kind of put in the challenges. your concerns or potential areas for improvement, okay? Then at the bottom part of the cookie, you're really working to make that relationship, and you're asking, looking at everything we've talked about, how can I best support you? How can the organization best support you? I've had staff who worked and were supervised by other people, and when we sat down to do the evaluation, or we sat down to have an informal conversation, I always use that cookie approach. And by the time I got to the third part of what can I do to help support you, I've had people be in tears because no one's ever asked them that. People just expect them to work and deal with whatever they got to deal with and make it happen. But that makes a big difference. Okay. Also, when you're in that conversation of having that evaluation with an employee, it's important that you want them to be able to develop 2 kinds of annual goals when you're doing this annual eval. The first kind of annual goal is a personal development goal in relationship to the work that they do. So if I am an HR person, Maybe my personal development goal for this fiscal year is to get an additional HR certification, right? To be able to help my career and my performance. Identify some level of personal goal that's related to the job. And the second goal is an organizational goal. So it doesn't matter what the person's role is in the organization, there is some way that they can contribute to making the organization better. What could that look like for you? With the skill set that you have, the talent that you have, what can that be? So those two kinds of goals, the professional development goal and the organizational goal, really helps people to feel engaged and connected. They feel that you care about their careers as individuals, but you're also being able to leverage their commitment towards helping you to build something which gives them additional ownership into their own organization that they work for. So it's not just them connecting a paycheck. Then you could talk about how you're going to kind of implement those goals throughout the year. Then you have your final comments and revisions. Make sure that everybody gets a copy of that eval and that it's on file for HR. Okay, so we've recruited, we've acculturated, we've trained, we've evaluated, and it's still not working. Now what do we do? Okay, so you have this first meeting of the person who is not working out so well. And the first session is essentially kind of like a counseling session. And you're kind of going over what's working, what's not, and how can we be able to do improvements. It's important to really be able to hear what they say to you, because they may give you some key piece of information that's an insight that could really help your organization to be able to run well. But that counseling piece is very, very important. And sometimes that's enough to reshift. Sometimes that's enough to get somebody back on track, as just kind of having an informal conversation. But when it becomes repetitive, you may need to actually close your ears, write them up. That's something that we don't like to do, but it is actually very important. It's a learning opportunity, just like everything else, but it's something that's very important. I had the basic 1, 2, 3 write up, right? Write up number 1, write up number 2, and write up number 3. If you are dealing with a problem that's a consistent problem, that's even more important to document it. So if it's something that's not being changed or addressed over time, having that documented proof is key before you can even walk into HR saying you want to terminate somebody. It's not enough to say I don't like them and they had on a red jacket and I don't like people with red jackets. No offense. I love you, Cordell, and I love your red jacket. But you got to have some actual proof, okay? So that's where this documentation comes in. One of the other things that I do is when I reach this kind of point with an employee, when we have this informal conversation, I actually follow it up with an email summary. And I print that email summary, and that goes into their file. So that way, it's not just like we had this informal conversation and you forgot what I asked you to do or you forgot what the plan was. It's very clear. So that's important. Written reprimands, 1, 2, and 3. Next column is short or suspension. But what I tend to do is, I disagree with that slide a little bit. I like to try probation. A probation period gives them an opportunity to be able to say, hey, we've gotten 3 write-ups. What can we do? But your probation needs to be very specific. It needs to have a time frame. You're on probation for the next 60 days. These are the things I need to see happen during that time. This is the person who's accountable to check to make sure that these things happen. And at the end of the 60 days, we'll reevaluate. And in that, and if you need like an example of a probation form, you can definitely reach out to us and we can get you that. It's very clear the time frame, who's responsible, what you're looking for, what you're asking for, and that on that probation form it also says in the event that this is not successfully remediated, it can lead up to termination. Okay. So it gives them an opportunity to say, oh shoot, she's really serious, she ain't playing. And that may be enough to turn things around, potentially. If not, then you can walk into the suspension aspect and the termination aspect. But by the time you've gotten there, you have this preponderance of evidence of the training that you've sent the employee through, of all of the opportunities for performance improvement. And you could have an actual performance improvement plan. There's another template for that. You could use that. That's very specific. You have all of the write-ups. You have any email correspondence that was in relationship to any informal conversations that you have. You have their probation and how they did on that or not. And now you could talk about termination. So I've had clients call me and say, we want to terminate somebody. And so my first thing is, well, let me see the file. No file. Or it's a file and it has their contact information. It's no write-ups. I'm like, you can't terminate him? And back in the cycle, oh, here we go. I knew I had another one. Performance improvement, we'll get into that. But back in the cycle of where we are in staff engagement retention, you got to go back to training because you don't have anything. So if you don't like him and he's not doing well, you got to go back and retrain him and then evaluate and then lead back up. So, all right, here we go. Yes, sir.
How long is that process? Say you have a performance review, 90 days, 6 months, a year, you have the discussion, all that. And
Right.
Then, you evaluate, there's some challenges.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to stop it. I'm going to answer your question, but I'm going to we hold the questions to the end because it may cover it in the presentation. And I know Patrick needs to pass out microphones. So you raised some anxiety for Patrick back there because he's like, he doesn't have a mic. Okay. So that process works as naturally as it can. There's not like a 3-month time frame or something like that, right? But if you're depends on where you are. If it's a new infraction, then you can start with the retraining, right? And then to evaluate them. First thing is figuring out is when the last time they've been evaluated. Have they ever been evaluated? If they've never been evaluated and they work for you, you start with the evaluation, period. And then you go to the training, right? And then you can work through finishing everything out. But you need to give them enough time to remediate. That's the key. And so that's what I'm saying, it depends on how long it is. It depends on what type of job it is and what kind of action they need to be able to remediate. But you need to give them enough time to do that and or not do that. Okay, performance improvement plan. So this is an opportunity for things aren't working out. I need you to be very specific. Performance improvement plan usually goes in line with probation. Okay, so it's very clear. You're not wondering what they're supposed to do. So it's looking at the behaviors and job-related things you need to be able to make adjustment on. You're going to build in that ongoing discussion. You're going to have opportunities in there to give feedback. So you don't just like put somebody on probation or put them on a performance evaluation plan and don't hear from them again until the end of it. Doesn't work. So you have to build in opportunities for them to be able to talk with you, for you to be able to check in with them informally throughout that process, because that'll give you a good judgment on how it's going. Then you won't be surprised at the end when you're like, I'm sorry, and they won't be surprised at the end when you're like, I'm sorry, okay? Because you've been keeping that door of communication and feedback open. You're also making sure that you're reviewing past performances, look at opportunities for development, for retraining. One of the big questions I ask when we get to this point is, what is your big dream? Something that kind of has nothing to do with their particular job, but what is their big dream in life? If I can find a way to connect your job and your role in some way on that trajectory of what your big dream is, I can usually get a win. And sometimes that may mean modifying your job description a little bit or giving you an opportunity to act in a way that's outside of your role, but that will promote you towards your dream. So for example, I had a supervisor, so you could imagine I was probably difficult to supervise. I had a supervisor who knew that my big dream was to do this kind of organizational leadership, organizational management stuff. I was in a role that was like this big and didn't offer any kind of opportunity for that. But because he knew that that was a big dream of mine, he would let me sit in on some of the larger operational meetings that my role typically wouldn't sit in on. And that was enough to keep me really, really excited about that job. So when I went back to my little job that I could do with my eyes closed, what kept me excited and challenged and motivated was I knew I was going to get to go to the next executive management meeting and sit in and give a little bit of feedback to my supervisor in relationship to what I saw and heard. So that's a way of being able to kind of align someone's big dream and what you know that's important to them with what they're doing currently. And that can be part of the way of helping them to be able to redeem themselves. Reward and recognition. Back to the recognition piece. When you catch the person who you've had challenges with doing well, please acknowledge them. Let them know that you see it. That makes a big difference. Positive reinforcement, Skinner and Pavlov's dog, right? The sound and the salivation, right? But every time they ring the bell, the stuff still works. So make sure that you recognize them. All right, so there we go. So we talked about staff recruitment. We covered onboarding and acculturation. That training piece is key. And then we can evaluate, and then we can terminate if we need to. All right? All right. See what else we got. How else can we keep people in here? Let's talk about the 5 dysfunctions of a team. All right. So this is really cool. This is Patrick Lencioni. There's books, workbooks on this thing, but this is key. The bottom, it starts at the bottom of the pyramid, just like Maslow's pyramid, which we'll also talk about in a second. The absence of trust is what makes everything implode. If I don't trust you, and I don't believe that you have my best interest at heart, I don't believe that you're looking out for me or that you even genuinely care about me, you're going to get very minimal performance out of me, if any, at all. I'm also going to be difficult to collaborate with, to work with. My coworkers may not like me so much, but it really comes from me not trusting you, not trusting the organization, not trusting the vision, not trusting the leadership. We can go on and on and on. But that absence of trust is huge. One of the first things that makes things difficult. If we don't have trust, then when conflicts arise, it doesn't go so well because I don't trust you. And so when I have a problem, I may not tell you. I may just sit on it because I don't feel safe enough with you to say, I'm having this challenge, how can we work this out? So now I'm not really committed. And then it's hard and difficult to hold me accountable, and you see I'm giving poor performance. So most of what we see when we have an employee, especially one that may not be doing so well, or one that doesn't seem connected or doesn't seem brought in, we see the top of the pyramid. We see their performance. We see that they're missing assignments. We see that they're missing deadlines. We see that they're showing up to work whenever they decide that they want to show up to work, or they're using every opportunity to not be aware, to not engage. We see them sitting off in the corner during a team exercise or a team meeting and not saying nothing. They show up in a meeting, they never speak. That's what it looks like. That's the top of that pyramid. But if we go a little bit further down, we can usually get to the real meat of the matter, which, if not addressed, is typically the absence of trust. This works for as individuals, and it works for entire organizations. Okay. Right? Because we all have needs. We're people, right? We're humans. So it's very important that those needs are being met in some way. Here's Maslow's pyramid. Basic needs, physiological needs for food, water, warmth, and safety. That belongingness, again, matches with the intrinsic motivation idea of relatedness. Same idea. Same idea. Feeling recognized has to do with your esteem. And then when we have that foundational piece set, then we can be at our best. We can perform at our optimal. So some of the times when you're having these informal conversations with staff, you'd be surprised how many people are actually homeless. They don't have anywhere to stay. Or their paycheck is not enough to cover to the next paycheck, and so they didn't have anything to eat this morning. And that's the reason why you're having a problem. So it's important that as supervisors, as managers, that we're really looking out for the people who we're responsible for. As executive directors, we're responsible for these people in our organization, for these volunteers in our organization. So it's important that those needs are met and that we can meet them as best as we can within the context of a workplace and or refer them out if there's needs that extend past what we can do in a workplace setting. Here we go, intrinsic and extrinsic motivators. So we talked about intrinsic motivation a little bit in relationship to competence, relatedness, and autonomy. The idea of belonging, mastery, being able to do what you do well. Those are the things that get people internally excited to be awesome. Because as nonprofits, we don't have too many high-level extrinsic motivators. Your paycheck ain't so great. You could probably go to Google and do the same thing and get paid 4 times more. We may or may not have a full benefits package of health and retirement and pension and X, Y, and Z, right? All of those are external, extrinsic motivators. People who come to work for nonprofits, they come to work with you because they care about your vision, they care about your mission, and they care about the community. Those are all intrinsic motivators. It's not the money. That's not why they're there. It's not the salary package. That's definitely not why they're there. So it's important that we develop that intrinsic motivation through those ways of keeping them connected, because we know that that's why they came to us in the first place. And then what do we do with change? Organizational change, management change, leadership change, program change, mandates from outside, regulatory compliance changes, change. So when we first find out about change as individuals, and this counts for everybody, and it doesn't matter if it's change that you decided on your own or change that's imposed on you. The first time we find out about it, we're in shock, and our morale and productivity is at the bottom. So you're telling me I now have to report to Jane when I used to report to Joe? I start at the bottom of the, there we go. Start at the bottom of the pyramid right there. And then we go into denial because we act like, okay, he said that I was going to have to change reports last week, but that didn't happen. So I'm just going to act like I still report to Joe, and I'm going to keep talking to Joe till they tell me otherwise, right? But then when it becomes clear that I'm actually no longer reporting to Joe, then I may end up with a little bit of resistance. I may be a little bit upset about that. And as my manager or supervisor, you have to be able to kind of work with me to support me around getting past that. Making those changes, sometimes people get into actual depression. You'd be surprised. A lot of us we like familiarity as humans. We like comfort. We're creatures of comfort, right? So when our environments change, it does something to us. So it's important that we know that we could be an executive director, but we're also human. And she could be the director of HR, but she's still human. And so change is still going to impact her. But if we can help them to transition through that anger and that depression into the idea of engagement, and really what makes the key there is letting them know how their role connects to the larger picture, how your organization serves the bigger story. Knowing that you're a part of something bigger than just you really helps you to kind of be able to recalibrate and to potentially re-engage. Come up with some new ideas, and now you're on board with whatever that change is. But know that this is the cycle when you tell your staff that they have to report to somebody new, when you tell them that they're going to be switching job positions, when you tell them, this is my favorite, when you tell them a consultant's coming in, they go through that too. And that's okay, because I'm going to talk about that because I know that that's where they are. And one of my favorite things is I help them Pick out where you are on the spectrum. Be honest with me. Tell me where you are. And let's see how I can help you to move through it. But that's individual response to change. So how do we deal with change as a team? Making sure that we are clear on the mission and vision, and that there is understanding of the urgency of the change, whatever that is. And that the change may be something as small as a change in task. It may be something as big as a change in organizational strategy, which is a larger change. Then you have to get people on your team who are going to help support and implement that change. When you're doing those larger kind of organizational strategy changes, it's important that you have your HR person, your mid-level supervisors, and your executive management team as a part of that guiding team. It's not just the ED. Because if you don't have your mid-level supervisors, you're done. Because they're going to choose the sides of the people who they report to, and now you're going to have a split, and it's going to be really difficult. So you need all of those people on board if you're going to be steering the Titanic in a different direction. Making sure that you're communicating the vision, being clear that it's being articulated throughout all strata of your organization, from the top all the way down. One of the first things that I think I said this before, I come into an organization, I ask the first person that I see, what's the vision of the organization? Most people have no clue. So I go, why are you here? Right? So that piece is very important. Making sure that we're giving people the tools and the resources to be able to actually empower action. That's one of the biggest things of that feeling of organizational poverty is not having enough, is that we're not giving people the resources that they need to do what they need to do. So making sure they have that. Making sure that you're building in short-term wins and you're acknowledging success along the way. Success is just not when you get to the end. Success is all those incremental pieces of progress. So you have to acknowledge each one of those along the way. Keep doing what you're doing. Change is difficult and it takes time. So if you're not seeing an immediate change, don't stop doing what you're doing, because you'll always be continuing to start over. So keep following it through. And then work on aligning your culture with what you want it to be or where you want it to go. Okay, so this is going to be part one for Q&A, Patrick. So we covered a lot there, and I want to give you guys an opportunity to be able to ask a question.
Thank you. At the beginning of your presentation, you talked about the job description. And each organization, they have different styles of job description. Some are very detailed, lengthy, some are very brief, short, one page.
Right.
And always at the very end, there is the duties assigned by, other duties assigned by the supervisor. That captures. And yet, when employees are hired, and they, and I think a lot of it due to lack of good onboarding, they raise questions that this is not in my job description, when it is in the job description. It's not identified exactly. So how do you deal with those situations?
That's a fabulous question. Number one, I go back to the piece of kind of doing that time study idea, because it may be indeed right that what's on the job description is not what they actually do in real time. And so they feel like it's not a match. So having them do that idea of the time study is one piece of that. And then if you find that there is an aspect of the job that's a critical aspect of the job that you find out through the time study, but that's not reflected on the job description, you update it. So the job description is a working document. It's not set in stone. And so it should continually being reevaluated, reassessed, and updated to match what the real job actually is in real life as the real job kind of morphs and forms. A lot of the time your job description was created when the organization was created, which things were different. So having that opportunity to be able to integrate that new information in and offering them that opportunity to add things into their job description. And sometimes how I think about it is asking them, if someone else was to come in and do your job, what would they need to know? And then that'll let you know kind of what updates you need to make to that. And they'll be happy to add into that.
See, hi, thank you. Still formulating my question, but essentially what I'm curious about is as you're working with an employee around performance, and you definitely have their best interest at heart and you see that someone is genuinely struggling, I'm curious about, in your experience, sounds weird, in your experience, when do you think it's the most appropriate to suggest to the employee like EAP, Employee Assistance Program, I believe, so that they can get some additional support, but so that you are still holding them accountable for, you know, their performance. When do you think, if you can provide some examples, and when do you think it's the most appropriate for the employee?
That's a good question. Particularly for organizations that deal with a significant amount of trauma and vicarious trauma, yeah, so that would be you. Talking about the EAP should be a normal part of the culture. So it shouldn't only come up when you're looking at someone's performance. So it should be a normal part of meetings that we talk about. It should be a normal part of how we take care of ourselves, of self-care. That should be a normal part of the conversation that you're having. So that when you do bring it up to an individual, it's not like you're trying to say there's something wrong with you, you're broken, you need to go to therapy. Right? Which is what it sounds like if you never ever talk about it as a part of your culture. Mm-hmm.
Can you give some examples of perhaps when you brought it up, suggested it directly?
Right. I guess probably one of the better examples would be when I've had an employee who's off a lot and who's used a lot of their time off, and then other time, and then they don't necessarily have doctor's notes to be able to kind of verify why they were off. That usually is an indicator that there's something else that's going on, and they're maybe under a significant amount of stress that they need additional support with. Other times, if there's a major crisis that I'm aware of that's taken place in relationships with a client they're providing services to, or anything like that, I would immediately like to debrief that crisis situation and offer EAP support and any other kind of support that they would need. So if I know that last weekend they worked 12 hours because the case that they were on broke wide open, that would definitely be a follow-up conversation on Monday.
What if they're reporting a crisis to you that's like, sounds personal, like my grandma just died, my mom just died. Oh, thanks. Do I really need it? Would that ever be, so that comes up a lot, right? And it has a potential to impact them. The client, you know, the staff is visibly saddened.
Right.
Is that appropriate?
My first response to that would be, how are you doing and how can we help support you? Mm-hmm. If they're saying that they're fine and it doesn't reflect in their job performance, I wouldn't bring up EAP. But if over time, I'm seeing that ever since they first told me that their grandmother died, gradually things are starting to change and shift with them, then I would check back in and you could use the information that they already gave you. That they told you about their grandmother dying. And you could even potentially say, you know, over the last month I've been kind of watching and it seems like things have changed for you. How can we support you through all the resources that we have, including our EAP?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned, excuse me, about the board, the role of the board.
Yes.
And of course, one of the primary roles is to evaluate the executive director. Have you seen in past practices where the board is evaluated, and by whom?
Usually the boards do self-evaluations.
I understand that. But,
Right.
where staff would like to be involved in that part of that evaluation.
Oh, I have.
We talked about 360.
Right. I've seen that happen, and sometimes that works very, very well. There definitely is a level of a learning curve to bring that to an organization if has not historically been that place, because the board may feel a bit on the spot in relationship to that. That also means that throughout the year, you've integrated the board members into the functioning of the organization. So they're there for events, major staff meetings and things like that, that at least somebody is present there. Because otherwise, if the board is not integrated into your organization and how it functions, the operations side of it, the feedback from the staff may not be as helpful or as pertinent. But if they're involved, then the staff feedback would be really helpful.
Thank you. I'm trying to figure out how to utilize staff's feedback of a colleague and their performance. And staff basically on the same level when that's brought forward to me. I may not have directly seen it, but they have concerns about a staff person's performance. And my role in coaching or that person or sharing it so it doesn't become like a he says, she says situation, but they have brought forward concerns. I may not have directly seen it, but they are probably valid. And so trying to figure out how to work with that employee whose colleagues have brought concerns about that person's performance and just kind of how to navigate that.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a phenomenal question. In that case, you talk in terms of themes. So not individuals, but when you're looking at the individual responses, you're looking for key themes that show up across the board. So if you have 5 different responses, there's probably 2 or 3 things that everybody said. Those are the areas that you actually focus on. Because that's the first part that's like consistency across that. And so if having informal check-ins and feedback is part of your culture, then it wouldn't be abnormal that someone would come to you and say, you know, there's been a number of themes that have kind of came up as we've been working together from the team. And these were kind of 2 of the things that kept repeating themselves. What do you think about those? Have you ever heard that? Has anybody ever told you that before? It's the first thing. Sometimes stuff comes up that people actually have never heard. It's never been brought to their attention directly. So asking them, have they heard it before, and offering them an opportunity to be able to respond to it or to speak to it is the first step to do with that. And then to be able to create if it's serious enough, to create a performance improvement plan around those 2 or 3 themes. And helping them to talk through what that how those themes impact direct reports, how they impact colleagues, and how they can be perceived by management. Those 3 pieces. Let me use an example. Maybe something like lack of engagement. What does the lack of engagement look like to direct reports? What does it look like or feel like with colleagues? And what can it look like or feel like with a supervisor? So helping them think through whatever those kind of key areas are in all of those 3 pieces and making the plan kind of fit towards addressing those areas. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay.
My question is, how do you get the buy-in from other people in the organization to kind of keep this moving? Because I can present this, and then I can't be the only one holding it together.
Absolutely. If you don't mind me asking, what is your role in the organization?
I am the admin development, so I work under the director.
Okay. That would be where you would talk about developing your guiding team. So it would be your guiding team who would help you to implement some of these practices if it's not something that's already embedded in. So it would be your executive director, potentially a member from your board, if you can have that particular aspect added too. It's a great way to get the board to jump in on operations. A mid-level supervisor of some sort, 1 or 2 or all of those people who are directly supervising people. HR. And that should be pretty good. That would be your team. And together, you would talk about how do we implement this across the organization? What does it look like? And you develop that plan, and then you communicate that once you've developed that plan together.
This is more of a follow-up to her question. One of the other value is having where the team that's involved in implementing the plan is, the team is the one who came up with the plan.
That's right.
Not just the board and the ED.
That's right. And that's where that culture of building together and everybody being needed and all the roles being important, that's how that comes into play. So you could present what you heard today and then talk about it. How does that look and feel to your team? Where are some things they see we're doing well, and what are some things we may need to look at? And then how can we start to look at that?
A lot of the stuff that you talked about, like building the trainings and having this, new staff for the trainings and even seasoned staff coming get into that conversation. Sorry, that we get into that conversation and then it falls apart and it's not continued. So like in three months from now, we're not doing what we said we were going to do now.
Right. So that sounds like a systems piece that chart could potentially help you with, or having a training calendar. And then there's also a level of accountability. Who's responsible for making sure that those trainings happen? When people go, who do they give their certificates back to? Who checks in on them? How is that tracked? That the training is taking place and people are participating in it and doing it. That was a lot of questions. You got like.
Sorry, I think kind of on that, I know you mentioned in the 8-step system, creating a sense of urgency.
Yes.
So how exactly would you go about doing that? Because I mean, only then does the team kind of see like, oh yes, we do need to do this, and yes, we do need to be consistent with that.
Right. This is going back to the idea of themes. Having something as basic as a organizational survey, suggestion box, things like that, you'll get a lot of feedback that's similar, right? And then those are the things that you can use to be able to kind of say, collectively, this is what we've identified as areas that we could probably improve. Everybody's feeling it. Doesn't matter where they are in the organization, everybody's kind of feeling it. And since we want to be our best, and we want to be sustainable, and we want to keep everybody on board, we don't want to lose anybody. No, it's like going to war, no man left behind. What can we do to address these things? And it impacts your bottom line. I never said that, but it costs a significant amount of money to onboard a new staff, to replace a person. It's much cheaper to retain them, if at all possible. I think the going number is close to 30,000 to onboard a new person from scratch. That's considering all of the training, their ramp up to where they become actually efficient in their job, a number of other things. It's a large number. So the retention piece, if we're knowing that we're having those challenges, it's cheaper to figure out how to retrain them and how to re-support and restructure the organization than it is to keep hiring new people and keep having people quit.
I just maybe want some suggestions on how, because you mentioned about managers want to fire someone. They had issues with the employee, and I'm in HR. I don't know about it until they want to fire them. So how do I try to educate them that we need to keep track of this ongoing and not just wait and say demand HR to fire someone?
That's right.
Because I can't do that.
That's
so
right.
How do I, what can I do to help them? I say it all the time, but
Right.
they don't listen.
Right, right. So it sounds like to me that the part of the organizational system that's kind of in miss is the evaluation system itself. So that's a conversation with the executive director, board, whoever that executive management piece is, to be able to start to implement a holistic evaluation system, top down. Part of that evaluation system is the piece of when we come to disciplinary situations, what needs to happen. So they need to be bringing you those write-ups. Now, when you get those write-ups, the first and second one, you can have the conversation with the manager then. So, because you can be part of the feedback into how we can help remediate this employee, right? So any write-ups that they do, those should be going to you and on file with you, and they should be having a conversation with you. So by then, you're very much aware, we've gotten 1, 2, 3, 4 write-ups, we're in probation, and this is what the performance improvement plan was. I was a part of signing off on that. I was a part of that meeting with that employee during the performance improvement plan or any one of that write-up process. And now we're at the point of needing to terminate. We're not getting to that write-up. They're just saying, oh, I discussed or I didn't talk with them. Right, right. And then it gets to HR, it's too late. Right, right. Right, so that preponderance of evidence is really important, but that's built into the evaluation process. I want to do one thing before because I want to make sure that I use the time. Is that where it is? Oh, okay, the time. Let's get into this small group breakout, and then we'll reconvene at the end, and I'll ask any other questions that you may have. Okay, but I want to make sure we get this exercise done too. So, Dennis, if you can help me pass these out, and maybe Patrick, if you could pass it on the other side. Okay, so I'm gonna reconvene you. I'm gonna reconvene you. I heard some phenomenal conversation going on. And that was 10 minutes. And I also feel like I gave you the assessment that generated even more conversation and questions. Right. So I really hope that you're able to use that assessment because it's an opportunity to be able to increase the urgency, to have a collective viewpoint on what's working well and what's not working so well, as well as to have some ways of looking at an organization in the 4 kind of major tiers that I've kind of defined them in, through infrastructure, through resources, through building towards sustainability, and through staff and engagement. That's the model that I use in the book that I wrote. So that's that build out. So we have some time left. Any other questions that you wanted to direct this way, particularly to the group that I can answer for you? That means I did a fairly decent job.
Thank you. What other kind of like resources have you maybe provided for vicarious trauma in order to help retain the staff, in order to help keep them like motivated in what they're doing, because it can be hard.
Right. The EAP is definitely part of it. Having retreats, opportunities of downtime, opportunities for people to just be themselves is a big part, particularly where you're dealing with an organization that's under a lot of crises. So building it up, it could be like a half-day retreat, or it could be something that on Fridays we end work 2 hours early. And the organization Hughes Treatment Center down in San Jose, on Fridays once a month, we ended the work day at 3, and we used one of the like comfy rooms and like put in a movie. And I would order pizza, and that's what they would do. It was just an opportunity. They were still at work, and they got paid for those 2 hours, but it was an opportunity to connect with each other as humans, to debrief anything that was really important, and to just have a little bit of informal fun. The other key is to debrief major incidents when they take place immediately after they take place or as soon as possible. So if it happens on Friday or it happens on the weekend, there needs to be a debrief of it on Monday. Because what happens is that people don't have an opportunity to debrief and come down from those situations, and they carry that stuff with them and in them, and it comes out through their job performance. So if there's not any built-in debriefing system that you have, that's something else you want to think about if you're particularly working in a high crises environment.
I have a question about job descriptions. How long should they actually be? Because I see some, like I will post mine like on Indeed or, you know, one of those sites, and I wouldn't even go through. Like, okay, this is too long to read. Like, right. I don't want to do it, right. So I'm not going to apply. So
really
like, I feel like it's just, it's like all these bullet points, and I'm like, how many of these actually like relate to like a staff leader's position? Right.
2 pages is typically fairly normal. 3 is kind of pushing it, but 2 is pretty commonplace. And also being able to kind of group tasks. And also think about percentages is another way. That's kind of where job descriptions are starting to go in that direction. So 75% of your job is fundraising, and fundraising includes blah, 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 blah. and 60% or 10% of your job is admin task, and admin's class may include blah, 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 blah. But finding ways of kind of, as opposed to that like just litany of bullets that you don't even see a connection between what the job is, finding ways to categorize and to somewhat build out the percentage of time, which helps with the thing of, that's not in my job description, when that happens.
You said, oh, I'm sorry. You said that you had, maybe we can get from you a probation or performance improvement plan that.
Yes.
If I can get that maybe emailed or something?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think we get if you're signing on a sign-in sheet, right? Then definitely, maybe on your way out, you can put an asterisk by your name, and I can definitely send you those two things, right? Can you make a note of that, Dennis?
You brought up something interesting about learning styles, the visual, auditory, kinesthetic, which is, first time I've heard of that. And how do we, if we want to do a self-assessment, where we fit in one of those, and of course we could be all three depending on our learning capacity. Is that something that you learned from Myers-Briggs?
No, the Myers-Briggs is personality. So
Personality,
learning,
okay.
Right, so learning style is completely, that's education, that's my teaching background.
Okay.
So we learned that in that. You can there's a ton of online quizzes that you can do that are free.
Okay, all right.
So you just put in learning style assessment, learning style quiz.
Okay.
And you can do a number of them.
Okay.
The auditory, kinesthetic, and visual are the top three. There's actually 7 different learning modalities.
Okay.
But the ones that are the top 3 is most common are those 3.
Okay.
And so you can figure out which one you are, and then who's on your team, which ones they are. Particularly if you're having trouble talking or dealing with a particular employee, figure out how they learn. Because it literally could just be an information communications thing. So,
Hello.
Hi.
I'm the admin coordinator for the organization that I work at.
Okay.
And pretty much I'm the right hand to the executive director. And I noticed that the staff in our organization, they'll get frustrated with their job and how things are going, and they'll vent all their frustrations to me. And I usually just tell them, I think you should check in with the executive director so you guys could talk about it. But I don't think they do. I don't know if they're uncomfortable. They just seem to always just come to me for the issues, and it's not much I can do about it. It's something the executive director has to handle. So at what point do I have to step in and tell the executive director, hey, I think you should check in with these people, because it sounds like they don't have the confidence to tell them.
In council, that is illegal. You arrested yourself. Thank you. Yeah, that's the Q&A.
Okay. Could you repeat the question again? I'm sorry, because I heard that you're an admin coordinator, and that people come to you with concerns that you've been directing them to executive director.
Yeah.
Could you repeat the end of what you said?
Is it my place to go to the executive director and tell her, hey, so-and-so is having these issues, I think you guys should talk about it, or should I wait and see if they do it themselves?
That's a really good question. And so when I first started working for a community mental health clinic, I was the admin. So my office was the vent office. So when the therapists were upset, when the staff was upset, when everybody was upset, they came into, for whatever reason, and I am not a therapist, they came into my office and I heard everything. And I knew what was going on everywhere. It was a little bit of stress for me, number one, because I couldn't do anything about it, because that wasn't necessarily my role. Luckily, I had a supervisor who I did have weekly supervision with, and I was able to kind of offload that information to that supervisor as things came to me, so that I didn't take on all of what people dumped in that office with me sitting there. If it is the case that, and I would used to do the same thing, I would redirect people to have the conversation with the person who they need to have the conversation with. But we all know that sometimes that doesn't work. And sometimes it has to do with personalities and trust, right? Let's go to the bus here. Trust. and other things like that. I do think that it's okay, particularly if it's something that's coming up for you a lot and there's kind of themes. That's why I would kind of hit on, and I wouldn't necessarily talk about individuals, but I would talk about the themes of the things that you hear that comes through your office that the executive director may not be aware of. And I'm bringing this to your attention because I kind of get to hold that, and that's okay. But these are some of the things I hear that you may want to look at before things kind of start to get out of control. And so I'm bringing that to you because I support you. I'm part of the organization, and I just wanted you to be aware. But I would definitely talk in themes and not in individuals.
Usually in the employee handbook, you should have a section on conflict resolution in the process that's involved. As if you have an issue, you go to your immediate supervisor. If not satisfied, you go to the next, and then you go to the ED. If you're not satisfied with the response from the ED, you can go to the board, the president of the board. There should be a clear delineation of communication.
Right, and grievance policy, exactly like what you're saying. Having a grievance policy, but that doesn't necessarily always stop the water cooler conversations. And so, when you're the one who gets stuck holding that, it can be really tough, and it can be really stressful, and add stress to the job that you already have, right? I would definitely, schedule a meeting to talk with the executive director in themes. And just bring one or two things to her attention, and then you're done, right? You've been able to kind of offload that off of you. You've been able to advocate on the behalf of an employee who may not be able to advocate for themselves, and then she's left to determine how to move forward with that.
From HR perspective, that's a great answer. Don't say names.
Right. Okay. Any other questions? All right. Well, this was awesome. Thank you guys so much. I really had a good time. And if you want me to send the probation and the performance improvement, just mark your name on the sign-out sheet. And then we'll be able to get that.
This session was video recorded. You already will have access to it. Everybody in the world will have access to this. But I just want to thank you all for coming out. On behalf of the City of Richmond, we appreciate Dr. Lydia for being here. We appreciate your level of engagement. And just want to put in a few plugs is that this session was recorded, which is why we require that you all speak into a microphone so that the questions, not only for those who are capable of attending, but those who might not be able to attend, that your questions are being captured and Dr. Lydia's responses in turn are also being captured in context. On November 15th, we'll be having our final capacity building session from Facebook and YouTube to You, which is how is it that your organization can leverage and maximize the tools that are available via social media to promote and market and get your message out regarding your organization and all the wonderful changes that you guys are getting ready to institute as a matter, of course, of engaging your staff and improving your strategies within your organizations. So that'll be on November 15th in this room, 10 a.m. to noon. We invite you all to come out and participate in that. If you have your evaluations, we'd also ask that you would complete those as well. We would love to get your feedback. And we will try to make available to you all the resources that Dr. Leah will provide to us. We'll just send them to everyone that signed up or registered, so you don't have to worry about checking a box or did I check a box. So again, thank you all for coming out, and we look forward to all the wonderful work that you all will do. Have a good day.